রক্ত কমলে গাথা মল্লখানি বিজয় লক্ষ্মী দেবে তাদেরই বলে মুক্তির মন্দির সোপান তলে কত প্রাণ হলো বলিদান লেখা আছে অশ্রু ঝরে মুক্তির মন্দির সোপান তলে কত প্রাণ হলো বলিদান লেখা আছে অশ্রু ঝরে যারা সর্বগত তারা এখনো জানে স্বর্গের চেয়ে প্রিয় জন্মভূমি এসব স্বদেশ প্রতি মহাদেশ ভালোবি
যারা সর্বগত তারা এখনো জানে স্বর্গের চেয়ে প্রিয় জন্মভূমি এসব স্বদেশ প্রতি মহাদেশ ভালোবি
সেই মৃত্যুর জয়ীদের চরণ চুমি
যারা জীর্ণ জাতি বুকে জাগালো আশা মৌন বলির বুকে জাগালো ভাষা যারা জীর্ণ জাতি বুকে জাগালো আশা মৌন বলির বুকে জাগালো ভাষা
আজ রক্ত কমলে গাথা আজ রক্ত কমলে গাথা মল্লখানি বিজয় লক্ষ্মী দেবে তাদেরই বলে মুক্তির মন্দির সোপান তলে কত প্রাণ হলো বলিদান লেখা আছে অশ্রু জলে মুক্তির মন্দির সোপান তলে কত প্রাণ হলো বলিদান লেখা আছে অশ্রু জলে লেখা আছে অশ্রু জলে
Dark milk, the richest creamy chocolate Cadbury has ever made.
I'm on a portrait. I don't want to expose myself.
मेरे बचन बजा के मालिक देश राजा मेरे बचन बजा के मालिक देश राजा যোগের বাজনা বাজা কে মালিক কে সেরা এটাই সাজা মুক্ত স্বাধীন সত্য কেনে পায়ে যে হাসি পায়ে যে হাসি ভগবান করবে ফাঁসি সর্বনাশী শিখায় কেদিন তথ্য কেড়ে তারা রইল হোকাপাট তারা রইল হোকাপাট ভেঙে ফেলে করবে লোপাট রক্ত জমাট শিকার বোঝার পাষাণ বেদি ওরে ও তরুণ ঈশান ওরে ও তরুণ ঈশান তোর গলায় বিষান ধ্বংস নিশান রূপ কাজের কাজের বেদি তারা রইল হোকাপাট তারা রইল হোকাপাট ওরে ও পাগলা ভোলা ধীরে দে খোলায় দোলা 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 রাত গোলা জোরসে করে আজকা টানে মারে হাত হই দড়ি হাত মারে হাত হই দড়ি হাত কাফেরে বন্ধুকে ডাক ডাক করে ডাক মৃত্যুকে ডাক জীবন পালে তারা রইল হোকাপাট তারা রইল হোকাপাট ভেঙে ফেলে করবে লোপাট রক্ত জমাট শিকার বোঝার পাষাণ বেদি ওরে ও তরুণ ঈশান ওরে ও তরুণ ঈশান বাজা তোর গলায় বিষান ধ্বংস নিশান রূপ কাচির কাচির বেদি তারা রইল হোকাপাট তারা রইল হোকাপাট তারা রইল হোকাপাট তারা রইল হোকাপাট
Past isn't dead.
So these are the sounds of some of the numbers being recorded. And these are obviously numbers that are recorded on very poor quality platforms. But they are rare because they are not part of the Indian Mumbai film industry. These are some of the principled words that are being recorded, and we are playing this as sample representatives. And to serve as a contrast to and a backdrop to the diagnosis of the British media, that is Fleet Street, and I've been showing some of the front pages of the Communist Morning Star from the last 3 weeks. These ones, including the latest one being about Dover. And this is the one about Dover, where the attacks on the migrants were being led by Johnson, acting so the attacks on the migrants represented the agenda of violating international treaties, conventions, agreements, declarations, and charters. That's what I've been saying for the last few weeks. And the fact that Johnson is caught today, or this week, caught as admitted by his minister, Brandon Lewis, breaking the international law, and even Stephen Glover in the Daily Mail warning Johnson against going too far. That shows the kind of disarray in the pandemonium government that Boris Johnson fronts. And what is obvious is that Keir Starmer, the so-called leader of the opposition, is not saying anything. And they've got their own proxies, like Charlie Faulkner. Charlie Faulkner is featured in the Daily Mail today in their Hardcastle column, describing him as a former flatmate of Tony Blair's. And they're recalling a diary item or an allegation that Goldsmith in 2003, who was the Attorney General, was physically forced by Charlie Faulkner and a woman called Sally Morgan, acting as among Blair's fascist kind of squad to force Goldsmith to give the go-ahead to Blair's Iraq dossier lies that were the basis for Blair justifying the attack, collusion with George W. Bush, the attack on the Iraqi children and women and the elderly, that has been found to have been completely false, because there was no threat posed by Iraq to Britain, and there was none of the other potential threats to anybody else, as painted by Tony Blair and in his legal kind of document or legal opinion. And today, 17 years later, Boris Johnson is caught lying. No, he's caught lying even worse. Blair said that it was not illegal because the Attorney General gave the go-ahead and all the rest of it. But Johnson is saying he's saying that he wants to break the law. So to those who said or thought that Blair was the pits, that he was the worst, now need to review and update their position, their opinion. It's Johnson who is the worse than Blair, because unlike the Goldsmith opinion, which was supported by the Daily Mail and others, the diluted and distorted and the doctored opinion that was not true and could not be true, the Financial Times and the Daily Mail today are running the story critical. They're critical of the law-breaking position and behavior of Boris Johnson. So the question is, how long can these organs maintain this? And how long can they actually resist the pressures that they must be under from the Johnson-fronted regime of weirdos? And there is no word yet from Keir Starmer. I can say, from experience of having dealt with Keir Starmer, when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions, he ignored repeated communications about serious criminality going on in the East End of London. And there was no prosecution. And the prosecution should have been taken place and other legal actions which didn't take place against the perpetrators that were working during the period of Starmer's term as the DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions. And the result of one of the results of Starmer's failure or decision not to authorize prosecution against the criminals, one of the consequences has been losses worth billions. And I repeat, losses worth billions. So we shall be looking at the role of Keir Starmer in due course, and we shall be updating on his role. And the role is one of complicity. And we shall be doing that as part of the continuation of the analysis of the role of the Tower Hamlets Council's elected Mayor Lutfur Rahman during the 5 years that he was in post. And we shall compare the role being played by his successor, John Biggs. And we shall be looking at the next door Newham Council's counterpart, which is the same mayoral system, the occupant in the post being Roxana Fiaz. And all these people in posts have been found on the facts to have failed the local communities. So, if Boris Johnson's law-breaking, illegal behavior is worrying, then on the local level, the illegal behavior of the elected post holders, elected mayor post holders, have been as illegal and as worrying. And so therefore, the pandemonium continues, and the ordinary people at local level or national level are not being served by these post holders. And therefore, the need for the Nazrul type uprising and the awareness and rebellion against the criminal perpetrating post holders is overdue. But the Extinction Rebellion protesters have been threatened with criminalization of protests by Boris Johnson. So Johnson is not only breaking the law internationally, but he is breaking the most fundamental of values and traditions of so-called British democracy at home. So Stephen Glover's warning to Boris Johnson that his own future, Johnson's own future, would be put at risk, doesn't go far enough. That phrase, far enough, doesn't go far enough or hasn't gone far enough, is taken from Rachel Johnson and her father, Boris Johnson's father too, Stanley Johnson. When both Rachel Johnson and Boris Johnson's father, Stanley Johnson, used the phrase that Boris Johnson's attack on the Muslim women had not gone far enough. So we've got a family of lawbreakers, racists, openly, brazenly breaking the law and expressing defiance that their breaches of the law had not gone far enough. Their violations of all the conventions and charters and declarations had not gone far enough. And the newspapers are not talking about that. Stephen Glover is not talking about that. He's not putting in perspective, in context, Boris Johnson's latest outrage against international law. He's not saying that Johnson has been a serial breaker of conventions and laws and declarations and charters and other duties and other parts of the other requirements of due process, which he should have done, which he would have done if he were a non-racist, an anti-racist, and a follower of international law and the obligations at home of due process. He's only doing this because there is a consensus among the majority of the observers that Johnson's threat to break off and deny and ditch the legal agreement with the EU negotiators is actually putting at risk much more British, quote, interests than they can afford to lose. So he's not apologizing for the racism that the Daily Mail carries on, promoting and peddling. He's not apologizing for the role of the Daily Mail in giving Boris Johnson any publicity, despite the fact that they know that he has been a serial liar for decades. So the media in Fleet Street is not doing justice to the people of this country who deserve a rigorous, investigative, seriously truthful media. And Fleet Street is letting the country down, as is Boris Johnson. So we shall be continuing this in the next edition. This is 14:16 GMT on Thursday, the 10th of September 2020.